Hi, everyone. I'm Gloria Mindock, editor and publisher of Cervena Barva Press. And tonight, my co-hosts are Renuka Raghaven and RJ Jeffries. So tonight we celebrate 3 writers and their new books just released by Cervena Barva Press. And it is such an honor to publish them. And I'm so excited to have them here to read tonight. Denise, David, and Michelle, you guys are the best, and it was so wonderful to work with you. And if you're interested in buying their books, you can buy from them or Cervena Barva Press, and our website is www.thelostbookshelf.com. So our first reader is Denise Provost, and this is her book. And let me go on to the big screen now. Speaker view, yay. So here is her book, City of Stories. And Denise served for many years in local government and for almost 15 years for the Mass House of Representatives. She has published in many journals, such as Ibbotson, Muddy River Poetry Review, Poetry Porch's Sonnet Scroll, Sanctuary Light Quarterly, and the Bagel Bards anthologies, and many more publications. She received the New England Poetry Club's Samuel Washington Ellen Award in 2021, and the Best Love Sonnet Award from the Maria C. Faust Sonnet Competition in 2012. Her chapbook, Curious Peach, was published by Ibbotson Street Press in 2019. And I give you Denise.
Thank you so much, Gloria, and everybody at Ibbotson Street. I'm thrilled that you published my book. Thank you all for being here tonight. I am going to start my reading tonight, as is traditional, by invoking the muse with the poem, Aspiring Poet Speaks. We know the muses are all female, right? That's why men write most of our poetry. I'm searching for a muse who's just my type and wants to spend quality time with me. A lissom redhead tempted me, but then came the deal breaker. She smoked cigarettes. A blonde Madonna whispered to me. When I turned, she'd become a heartless coquette. There was a dark one once with smudgy eyes, whose heavy-lidded look was eloquent. I leaned in closer, quick to sympathize, but she strolled off with some loquacious gent. I can't compete with masculinity. I don't think the muses will sing to me. The next poem describes a sort of method, I think, that speaks to the way all poets work and look for material. It's called The Thraldom of Stuff. With tinsel in her beak, the starling flies away to weave and decorate her nest. I sympathize. I too have magpie eyes, darting around, eventually to rest on that which sparkles or has a dull shine, a shape alluring to behold, enough to prompt me pick it up, claim it as mine. Oh, what a truly wondrous lot of stuff I've found right in the gutter of the street. A bicycle reflector, orange gold, a metal earring's rusty filigree, a single smooth and slippery domino. As connoisseur of rubbish, well I know how just to be as happy as a crow. And sometimes the muses appear as a group of elderly ladies in one's own neighborhood, as you'll hear in Commiseration. It was a kindly place, our neighborhood. We knew each other and we stayed in touch, passing on news. Though none of us had much, we shared our garden flowers, home-cooked food, and gave rides to the carless. Life was good enough for most, though sorrows always loomed. We stuck together, fighting off the gloom of bereavement and loss. The way we stood with Millie when her only son died young. Helen had fallen and broken some bones, so we had to bring her walker along when we drove to the wake for our friend Joan, who never had a bit of luck, said Flo, as her car skidded out on falling snow. See, another inspiration came in the form of the Pasha of Elm Street, someone I only saw from the street sitting on his porch. How he enjoyed life in that simpler time, escaping indoor heat, sitting outside, his feet raised up, cold pitcher by his side, surrounded by plants, his pleasure and pride. Vining nasturtiums bloomed along strings tied from porch rail to ceiling, then back again at intervals, weaving a floral screen, half concealing his chaise where he reclined, fanning himself, but always with an eye for dubious strangers on the street below, whom he'd halt with a glowering stare. So no house or car break-ins during his reign. His place, now plantless, is no longer green, but tarted up for tastes of those who come to buy luxury condominiums. The past, the porch, the man himself are gone, with his care of the street he oversaw. Now, one thing that I've always wondered about is what poetry is for and what it attempts to do. And I read a fascinating book by Terry Eagleton, in which he asserts that poetry is a superior form of babbling. So that inspired me to write Eagleton's credo. Just by existing, poetry fulfills our deeply held utopian desires, a form of life that's not so much enthralled to duty, but turns obligation's call back towards indulgence of our wayward will, to flirt among unattached signifiers. Suspend your grim communicative labors. Come to the fields of semiotic sport, where sound and meaning recklessly cavort. Lofty poetry covets its neighbor's wife, its house, servant, its horse and cart. Freed from loveless marriage to one meaning, poetry is superior babbling, convincing us that antic play is art. Now, if you look, you can find inspiration anywhere. The 40th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, I'd been at a rally and I took the sticker and put it on the calendar, which was one of those nature calendars. So my daughter came home and said, well, I'm glad the penguins are pro-choice. And I recognized that there was a poem there. And this is the pro-choice penguins. A crowd of emperors waddles on parade. From here, one sees their banners. Roe v. Wade, uphold the right to reproductive choice. They would shout out, if they but had the voice, about their own immense, compelling need to raise successful young. Each mouth to feed a hard task on these unforgiving shores along the Weddell Sea. If they had more than one offspring at once, how would they meet the challenge to keep warm on father's feet one precious egg? Meanwhile, each mother must hunt fish relentlessly as fathers trust their mate's return, their careful calculus for survival can allow no excess of breeding, which explains their stated goal, free access to all forms of birth control. I don't usually love political poetry, which ages so quickly, but this poem, Suspense, that I wrote in 2013, seems very prescient these days. Our Supreme Court equates money with speech, while voting rights have become obsolete. The enemy comes pouring through the breach. A mob is breaking windows in the street. It's looking bad for our democracy as sequestration shuts government down. The villain has the hero on his knees. A zombie army overruns the town. Corruption and obstruction rule the day. The press collapses. Leadership implodes. Space aliens have a paralyzing ray. They use it ruthlessly as all explodes. Will evil triumph? The end times begin? I've seen this movie. Don't the good guys win? Now, for a lot of my poetry, Somerville is my muse, and that's reflected in this poem called Pearl Street Ramble. A hot night, no one wants to be indoors. All congregate on sidewalks, porches, steps, conversing there in many dialects, the babble music of a cozy world. In tiny gardens, big enough to hold 2 rose trees and a smiling grottoed saint, moonlight reveals petals and halo paint. I wander past a building, once the home of good friends, educated, cultured folk, well brought up, financially insecure, so genteel that they could not bring themselves to recognize the works stashed by their door. A cup of hypodermics on a shelf, stowed by the tenants on the 2nd floor. Another locally inspired poem came out of my neighborhood. It's called Requiem for a Home. I never met the folk across the way. I'd give a friendly wave, but nothing more, because I thought they simply would not stay, but move on as our neighbors have before. You know how stories travel down the road? It was discouraging to hear the news that their landlord's mortgage too was foreclosed. Tenants turned out now, though they wouldn't choose to leave so soon. They're packing up their rooms while listening to music. Don't you hear a great soprano soaring voice that blooms from out their open windows like a prayer that they be spared from this cascade of woe? I wonder if they have a place to go. This next poem, the title's kind of a joke. It's called Transit, but if you add in the words that are in parentheses, it's Sic transit gloria mundi. You know, how quickly goes the glory of the world, but not the glory of the world, so don't worry. At the duty-free shop inside Dublin Airport, middle-aged women are employed to pour samples of liquors in small plastic vessels, offered to travelers, urged to buy more. One little stand I saw caught my attention. It advertised a drink which was called Cool Swan. May the public visit there? I asked the lady. Visit where? She asked me. I answered, Cool Park. Well, I wouldn't know, dear, she bluntly admitted. It's something to do with a poet who's dead. A famous one, though. Mr. Yeats, his name is. I nodded. I think I've heard of him, I said. O poet, O senator, Nobel laureate, you shaped your nation's life when it was new, determined its cultural future would be great. Rest easy, know that Ireland remembers you. So Poole Park was Lady Augusta Gregory's estate, where William Butler Yeats spent a lot of time, having his poetry nurtured. Somebody who heard this poem on Sunday told me about being in Dublin Airport and trying to buy a copy of Dubliners to take some friends. And she said, Dublin Airport didn't have a single book by James Joyce. So maybe there's a poem in that too. And I guess my final poem here will once again be directed to my muse. It's titled, Shall I Marry Poetry? Should I speak the vows? Can I honor and remain irreverent? Do I have it in me to obey? Is love as satisfying over the breakfast table as it was in the back of my old car? As oddly durable? Shall I take the risk of devotion? Or better to carry on in the familiar way, to say I'm working late, when instead I'm out with you, a little giddy from red wine, flirting madly over long-stemmed glasses. Will I love you as much over coffee cups? Will you still have as much to say to me? Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Denise. And our next reader is David G. Walker. And this is his book, Ifs Music, I can't say that word, Musing by David G. Walker. So here is the book. And David G. Walker's first poems were published in 2014. Since that time, he has published work sporadically with high points and dry spells abounding. I think we all can identify with that. His previous two chapbooks, Pause, a collection of moment poems, and Donating Organs in Boxes. Both of those were published by Finishing Line Press. In 2016, his poem, California, won the Steel Pen Conference Creative Writing Contest, and his poem, Cathedral, was nominated for the Best New Poets in 2018. And I give you David.
All right. So yeah, thank you, Gloria, for inviting me to this reading. Thank you for publishing my book, and thank you to the other readers for being here, and also everybody else who showed up to support us. So I do really appreciate this. And so I wanted to start with today. I do love the cover so much of this book. It was a surprise. Gloria sent me the image and I was like, I'm in love with this. And so I figured out kind of the poem that inspired the cover. So I wanted to start with that one because I feel like that would be a good start. So yeah, let me pull that up. All right, this poem is called If the Wolf Hired an Attorney. 1. Opening statement. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a textbook case of slander. My client has done nothing but more than live his life in a manner that takes full advantage of the rights and liberties promised to him by the United States Constitution, the very same rights that separate us from the commies. The rights that you, Your Honor, preserve for the citizens of this fine country every day. My client is guilty of a lot of things: zeal, conviction, eccentricity, but not of being the heinous monster that a prejudiced court of public opinion has made of him. 2. The Three Little Pigs versus the Wolf. The claims brought to the court by this trio of swine, assault, and damage to personal property. These pigs claim that my client went from house to house, wreaking havoc, threatening their lives, and causing damage to the point where their structures were felled. Now, if you notice, I put the word house in quotation marks because only someone with a healthy sense of humor could consider a pile of straw and sticks a house. My client was only attempting to point out the structural vulnerabilities of these. I'm sorry, I really just cannot refer to them as houses any longer. While his methods were admittedly unorthodox and extreme, I believe his point was made. A house that can be toppled by a strong exhale is not a house at all. 3, Little Red Riding Hood versus the wolf. My client has been charged with invasion of privacy and assault by the young woman in the red hoodie. She claims that my client became infatuated with her, stalked her, arrived at her grandmother's house before her, ate her grandmother, dressed in her grandmother's clothes, and attempted to seduce her. My client does not deny dressing in women's clothing, but that is no crime. My client even admits to being in her grandmother's gown and in her grandmother's house, but the reason is far less devious than this lady would have you believe. My client had been engaged in a secretive relationship with this young woman's grandmother for over a year. Miss Red Riding Hood interrupted one of their role-playing games and found my client in her grandmother's clothes under her grandmother's sheets. She couldn't come to terms with what her grandmother was, so she spun this tale to demonize my client. 4, The Wolf versus the Boy Who Cried Wolf. My client wishes to sue the adolescent who repeatedly cried his name and accused him of attacking a flock of sheep. On the night in question, when the boy sang out at the top of his lungs that he saw my client chasing sheep, my client and the boy were getting drunk on a hill just above the flock of sheep. Now, before you judge my client, understand that he was confused about the true age of the boy. The boy told my client that he was 7 years old, which to my client means that the boy was 49, well past the legal drinking age. In the inebriated state, the boy suggested that the two of them play a little trick on the townspeople. He told my client to hide behind the bushes and to jump out once the townspeople showed up. My client agreed and proceeded to stumble behind the bushes where he passed out. Once the boy called out wolf, the townspeople ran to him and saw that both the sheep were still there and there was no wolf. The boy laughed as a nervous reaction, so he tried it again minutes later and was met with the same result. Okay, all right. So let's go back from this one. Once the boy called out wolf, the townspeople ran to him and saw that both the sheep were still there and there was no wolf. The boy laughed as a nervous reaction, so he tried it again minutes later and was met with the same result. Now the boy was mad and began furiously chucking empty beer bottles off the hill towards the sheep, cursing my client. The sheep scattered, and the boy saw this as the perfect opportunity to exact his revenge on my client. 5, Closing arguments. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I believe I have made my case adequately. The charges my client is faced with today are mere fairy tale. Okay, we got through the first one. That's half the battle, I think. All right, let's do this one. All right, so this one that I'm going to do next, I'm not really sure what inspired it. I think I was a college student and I was in the common area and it was fall. So maybe this is what I was thinking of. So anyway, this one is called If the Wind Changes, or Dead Leaf Poem. The leaf said, "Don't come any closer, I'll do it." The other leaves swayed. That's it. He was not meant for this world, or maybe the world was not ready to find meaning in him. Whatever the case, he jumped. It was a graceful plunge. The leaf police would later report to his leaf wife, filled with many ascents and crescent-shaped falls. A lovely eulogy was interrupted by his alcoholic leaf cousin when he vomited on the casket meant for symbolic purposes. The casket, not the vomit. His body was never recovered. He was described as a fun-loving leaf who liked strong gusts of wind in the summer. He liked the feeling of it through his stem. How could this have happened? Soon, a cult was formed. They praised this leaf as a visionary, the only one who got it, who knew this earthly body was a tomb, a straitjacket, which must be cast off and thrown to the wind. It wasn't long until he gained a following, eager young minds ready to be liberated like their prophet. A mass suicide was plotted. The pigs tried to shut it down, but the leaf chief was a believer, so it was to no avail. One by one, they shook free from their branches and glided to be crushed under the sneakers of high school dropouts. They called it fall. All right. So next one. I would say this one is a bit shorter. I think this one came from one of those April challenges where you try to write a poem every day. And eventually you start to make your poems really short because you're like, hey, at least I did it. So that's where this one came from. Okay, so here we go. This one is called If the Moon Monologues. Unink your quills, writers. Stop trying to romanticize the moonlight. There is no such thing. Your intelligence misleads you to believing there are rungs on this ladder of the cosmos. Dust is all you are. Rock is all I am. Stop painting faces on soulless things. All right. Number 4. This one I am so happy and proud of because Gloria nominated this for a pushcart prize, and it just feels great saying that. So yeah, I feel like I should read it. All right, so this one, again, these poems come from a wild imagination when you just stay and you just let it go for a while, right? You just think of something and then you're like, where does this lead? And so this one is called If Stanley Kubrick Wrote a Children's Book. 1. Conception. He'd title it A Horse Named Stuffed. A lesson of loss taught through the most immediate and intimate forms of disembowelment and taxidermy. 2. Fruition. Vivid depiction of the taxidermist cartooned, hand hovering over a tray of glass eyes. Turn the page. The horse, mid-autopsy, abandoned haphazardly at a time where crudely drawn forceps were stuck in and now stick up out of the abdomen. Turn the page. A black and white photograph of a man, brow furrowed, tongue out, concentrating, aiming a 12-gauge shotgun down at a lying horse. Turn the page. Whistling taxidermist, needle and thread, working. 3. Reaping. The kids would grow up to be lawyers and doctors, some municipal workers, but all monitored after years and sobering years of how could we expose them to that filth past. Parents would tattoo damaged goods to their children's foreheads and read out rallies from their own essays titled Eulogy for My Child's Innocence. Then ex-hippies cured by neckties and coffee mugs would construct soapboxes out of their First Amendment and free speech and shout through man-sized megaphones about the purity of art, the danger of fascism, and the sanctity of a child's choice to choose when and by what means they're allowed to see a female's breast in the media. Others would catch the highlights of the debate out of context during commercials for grenade slicing knives and a plastic doodad that could hang a semi-truck from a ceiling fan. 4, retrospect. All would wonder if their blinders were on tight enough. All right. I think I have a couple more. A little bit of time. If I paused my timer, I don't know if that's legal, but I did. All right. So this is basically like, you know, as a writer, you send your stuff out, right? And then you get rejected a lot. Then you start seeing these letters, like in your mind, you rewrite them, like they're fine, right? The rejection letters are fine for the most part, but then in your mind, it becomes something else. So this poem is titled, If This Poem Were Rejected. Dear prospective contributor, in brackets, we regret to inform you that your insult to every decent aspect of art that you call your poetry submission did not make it through the first pass of readings. In fact, under my bidding, a committee has been formed to determine why anyone would consider this writing fit to be read by another human being. However, we do thank you for considering our magazine as a resource for publishing your horrific writing. We wish you luck in your future writing and publication efforts, but we see little to no promise in you and hope you actually take this as an embargo treaty of sorts and spare other editors a drunken night standing at the edge of a 5-story ledge by refusing to ever submit your work anywhere again. Sincerely. All right. So let's see. Yeah, I can do these two. All right, I got this. All right. This one is just one that I've like, I like the jokes. I like the joke in it, but I'm not sure anyone else gets it except me, but it's okay. That's kind of what writing is, right? All right. This one is called If You Could Melt Between City Cracks. You tell the worms what a sight it is up there. All they're missing. The combustible cacophony of jazz bands seeping through closed nightclub doors. Light so bright, night is just daytime with a burnt crust. A world void of soil and roots. Everything they wanted to hear. You didn't tell them about fish hooks or styrofoam cups, the whir of a schooner's engine, or seagulls not stuffed on cotton candy. You never told them about the concept of bait, the carrot and the stick, that they were the ones destined to be dangling from a thin nylon string for all the fish told about the open bars above sea level. All right, and the last one, I promise this is the last one. This one is I wanted to do because it's Christmas time. So, and I will be apparent right away why I wanted to do this one in Christmas time. Okay, this is titled If Santa Offed Himself. I have the original dead Santa ornament. I can still smell the formaldehyde. One day, when Santa was knocking a few back with Rudolph, of course, Rudolph lapping his bourbon from a trough, he decided that enough was enough. Enough listening to kids screaming up at him from his lap, demanding electronics that cost more than the yearly salary of a high school teacher in America. Enough of the missus complaining who couldn't understand how one night demanded so much preparation that he couldn't give her one night of meaningful conversation. Enough of the endless hounding of his nutritionist who kept lecturing, just because it's there doesn't mean you have to eat it. So he hung himself with Christmas lights. Dangling, he was found, preserved, and given to elves who know only how to hammer, painted after posed to sparkle in the glittering lights of sugar cookies and crayon wishes. Now, in a few years, he will catch a pretty penny on eBay when a bidding war ensues until Sports Fan 2012 finally caves and goes to the buy it now price. That pretty penny will blossom into a small fortune if I hold on to it longer. My granddaughter will be sitting at an odd angle from a white-haired man with a bow tie and a beige sweater vest, if such fashions are still reserved for the pompous host of Antiques Roadshow at the time. He will point to the Santa hat, mildewed despite the preservation chemicals, the oddly ragged indent where reds and greens dug into his neck, the loss of value due to a set of replacement lights. All in all, not a bad piece. And that's it.
Thank you, David. I love where your brain goes, and thank you for reading your nominated poem. And our next reader is Michelle Reale, and this is her new book. Michelle Reale is a full professor at Arcadia University. She is the author of 12 collections of poetry, including Season of Subtraction and Blood Memory prose poems. She has twice been nominated for a Pushcart Prize, and this is the second time Cervena Barva Press has published Michelle. So I give you Michelle.
Oh, thank you, Gloria. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, my friends that I see who came in this evening. I see all of you, and I really appreciate it. I appreciate everyone who's here. These poems need a little context, so let me just tell you very briefly about how these poems came about. Confini means walls in Italian. I conducted ethnography in refugee camps in Sicily for 7 years and worked with refugees mainly from Africa. And then during the highest point of the Syrian war, worked with a lot of Syrians. I was based in Siracusa, Sicily, which is a port town where a lot of boats came in. And I collected a lot of data. So I collected 7 years of data doing my ethnography, and I used the method of poetic inquiry, which is a research methodology to be able to express what I experienced and what I witnessed. In some cases, I've used the refugees' actual words. I have changed all of the names. I've tried to be very truthful, but when you do work like this, truth is always partial and not complete. And there are many, many different sides of the truth, but this is what I witnessed. I will maybe before each poem give you a tiny bit of context just to orient you. Any Italian words that I use, I'm an Italian-American poet, so a lot of my work focuses on issues of Italian-American life and the mythologizing of the culture and other things associated with the culture. Okay, the first poem is called Tibia Plays in the Refugee Camp. She likes to play mommy, but first she colors the picture she has drawn. On a small boat, a big sea surrounded by curly cartoon waves. The waves have eyes, thick, angry eyebrows. Her little brother tries to grab her paper, his small hands opening and closing. She smacks him hard, intones the voice of her missing mother, shakes her pudgy little finger with chipped orange polish in his face. He cries, running into the arms of an Italian relief worker who tries to console him while holding him at a distance. She goes back to her picture, starts outlining the waves in blue and green. The flies are persistent, landing on her nose, eyelashes, and the many braids in her hair. She sighs, puts down her crayon, and picks it up again. The men from Mali, their backs against the chain-link fence, watch her with vacant eyes. She gazes at them, sitting like sentries. A whine turns into a sob. The scattered clouds are iron gray, holding and blending with the concrete. A woman who is not Tibia's mother shuffles by, dragging her feet in rubber slippers. Tibia begins to say her own name over and over again, as if trying to remember who she is. She goes back to her drawing, adds stick figures to the boat. They all have their stick arms up in the air, alarmed. All of their round, broken heads have mouths that are large, red and agape. This next poem is called Exodus and Requiem. On my way to aperitif with a friend of mine at 6 o'clock, everyone in Italy goes for drinks. We were walking along the Lungomare, which is the route all along the sea, and we saw helicopters and rescue boats, and I watched as they pulled a young girl lifeless from a small boat that was just a few feet from me. She had traveled with her father, and she was dead upon arrival, and this is about how they buried her in a Muslim girl in a Christian ceremony in Sicily. The boat drifts in the gloaming, no room for the needed insulin, reassurances with the gleam of a gold tooth. You will arrive before you know it. Imagine. You cannot generate a future from a body bag. The darkness envelops everything when the sun is not blinding you. Soon, out of necessity, survivors will learn new things. How to politicize a death. Invite the mayor, a politician, an imam, and a broad-minded priest. An archbishop in solemn robes presides among the faithful, adding the appropriate dose of gravitas. Forget caritas. Here, the men know what to do with the dead body of a young woman. Insert a bit of Arabic, murmur appropriate outrage, act like you mean it. Fare bella figura. Here are misbegotten contracts of the highly charged situations. Her father arrived with her, but is now gone in search of his new home. The white van with the German license plates will take him there. He leaves her to the indifference of strangers. Her stiff body lies in the Duomo, so far from where she has come. Strangers puzzle over her death with morbid fascination. Tourists take photos of the ceremony. They lick their gelati, and eventually they move on. To the well-dressed women sweating in their thick makeup, benedictions and speeches are blessedly short. Afterwards, watch them refresh their bright lipstick on their grim mouths and light their long brown cigarettes. This poem is called Passage. That iron, unbreakable faith is misplaced from the beginning. That boat is not a seaworthy vessel. That man is not your father, and he's not your brother. The money you hand over, touching palms as though it really means something, does not make a contract of safe passage. Trees, sun, sand, home, skeleton key, and village elders will soon be replaced with cement, salt water, and indifference. That is not sweat, those are tears. Here comes the feel of a boot on the back of your neck, whether real or imagined. Hear the intonation of your own parched voice whispering like a mantra, why, why, why? This poem is called The Half-Life of Boats. I have been on many refugee boats that have been docked all over Italy, and I can't imagine anyone making any kind of a voyage on any of them. They're pretty horrific. The boats are tethered to the dock, undeserving even of proper nautical knots. Here lies the evidence of those who travel light, not out of conviction, but cruel necessity. Someone is apparently negotiating his new home with one shoe, the ever hopeful without his striped tie, without the packets of Syrian tea that are waterlogged amidst the shit, the plastic bottles, the coat shed to the extreme heat, the cold, the dark, and the confusion. The boats bob lightly, swaying in the sea breeze. Like the sad pieces of refuse they are, their job is done. What remains is the corrosion, the leaks, the ash. The rust is alive, it proliferates. The smell is indistinguishable to the uninitiated from the spill of blood, from open veins, from the breaking of hearts, the dry rot of hope, from the crude excision of everything that came before it. Okay, this is called Welcome/Reception. Do not protest the separation of the parents from children, the young from the old, the merely sick from the dying. Smile at the guards, grim-faced officials swilling their coffee. Ignore the firearms strapped to their tense arm muscles and their bulging thighs. Ignore their large open pores, the extreme heat, their controlled but taut and tired patience. Perform your role. Be sad, but not too sad. Gratitude will go a long way. Keeping your eyes downcast is a strategy that anecdotally has been a success in the past. Ask all the right questions. How long can I stay? Can I call this place home? Think carefully before answering theirs. Why do you come? Where will you go? When will you leave? There's something refugees are expected to perform being refugees, and if they are not acting properly wretched, they will often be denied their asylum. I've sat in many bids for asylum, watching refugees from many different countries performing their bid for asylum, and it's really it's a sad thing to see. My last poem is called Leaving Umberto Uno. Umberto Uno was probably one of the worst refugee camps that I spent time at in Sicily. It is all cement and barbed wire and chain link fence and flies and extreme heat and boredom and just nothing for the refugees. No magazines, no games, no snacks, no entertainment, no television, no radio, literally nothing. Okay. Leaving Umberto Uno. They began to circle like blackbirds. One tosses his cigarette, too tired to inhale, exhale. Shoulders hunched, baggage in heaps where one old woman watches like a sentry. The women wear somber headscarves in the heat. One girl holds a wedding dress, buries her face in the rough lace. Animated Arabic mixes with dialect, and the smiles of the carabinieri are tight, their patience worn thin as a communion wafer. The road outside of the high iron-like steel jaws awaits, but it entices those who want to leave the country to go on to meet other relatives who survived the journey. We are told to turn our heads, to look away. The guards with their guns turn their heads, some cross themselves. They begin the sad march to who knows where, a path strewn with malignant thorns, soon a new alphabet for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. I would like to thank all the readers, which just touched me so much. Really wonderful, wonderful work tonight. And now we come to our Q&A section. So if anyone has any questions, please raise your hand and address to which writer you would like to ask. And I'm going to switch to gallery view now so we can see everybody. So are there any questions? Raise your hand if you have anything. Yes, Alyssa.
That was really moving. I'm like, I just want to cry. So I'm gonna, I need a minute before I can ask my question, which is not really about one of the sad things we've been hearing. I wanted to ask Denise, who is a neighbor of mine, how many neighborhoods she's lived in the beautiful city that she writes so beautifully about.
I've lived in 3 Somerville neighborhoods, but I've represented the whole city at one point when I was the at-large alderman, and 3 wards and 2 precincts when I was state rep. And I lived in Cambridge actually before I lived in Somerville for 10 years. So I lived in a lot of neighborhoods there too, probably more because people kept buying places where I was living until I couldn't afford to live there anymore. So yeah, I've lived 50 years in the same 2 or 3 mile area.
Any other questions? I know Denise, you've done a lot for Somerville, and we are lucky to have you. And even though you're retired now, we will miss you. So thank you for everything you've done. Any other questions?
I just wanted to make a brief statement. David, I think Santa still loves you. Yeah, I love your dark slant. You and I need to talk sometime. We're kind of wired the same way. I just started, I don't know how, with no strength, started to work on an essay last night that I noticed it started out very bright and cheery, and it got dark real quick. So I'm feeling you, especially tonight. Thanks so much for sharing. Thank you all. Wonderful books.
Any other questions
I
or
think so.
comments? Yes, go ahead. Michelle, I think you said you wanted to say
I think
something.
Christopher Varlak has a question.
Hello. My question is for Michelle Reale. Thank you for sharing that wonderful work, and the ethnographic work that you do is so important. Could you speak a little to sort of like the goals behind the poetry that you've written in this collection?
Sure. Thanks, Christopher, for asking that question. My goals are, I have a few goals. One is that I think that writing about refugees and writing about the situation of this worldwide phenomenon of refugees, people are on the move more now than ever before at any time in history. I think being able to write about them in a way that is devoid of jargon and politicization of them is extremely important. It was important for me to be able to also write work that could also be consumed by the refugees, that they can read it themselves and that it was accessible to them. I think that sometimes writing poetry like this can change policy on a different level. People could read poems like this and realize what is actually happening, that refugees, Berlusconi at the time that I was doing ethnography in Sicily just called these people a human tsunami, right? So my aim was to write about individuals with lives. I remember one refugee from the Sudan saying to me, I have a mother, I have a father who love me. I have a family that loves me. I didn't fall from a coconut tree. I have a whole lineage. I have people that care about me. But when people see me walking down the street in Sicily, they don't recognize that, So I think that using poetic inquiry, using poetry, or using other creative methods of examining situations like this in the world can open the eyes to a situation that other people might not normally read about unless it was in a form that they enjoyed. So thank you, Christopher.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. And I'm sorry I didn't see your hand raised. Is a question from anybody else? Oh, yes, go ahead, Kathleen.
Okay. Well, I had the pleasure of sitting beside Denise in the Massachusetts House of Representatives for one term, but we've remained friends, and it's a pleasure to be here to hear her poetry and to see her. And it was a gift to listen to all of you, and beautiful poems and fun poems. And so it was nice to take a break. And thank you, Denise, for guiding me through so many times in there, and the brain power that she had to help me make the right votes in very complicated situations. So thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. And thank you for all you do too. Another question from anyone? Okay, then that will conclude tonight. And again, thank you so much to the readers. Can we give them another round of applause?